Okay, people, good morning once again. So today we would be discussing about the Linux fundamentals, that is the basics of any DevOps course. Like as part of the DevOps, like yesterday we have discussed a few things, right? What are the courses which we'll be learning as part of, what are the technologies and also things which we'll be learning as part of the DevOps. Like the first thing we'll be dealing is something like we'll be dealing with the Linux fundamentals. Like every DevOps engineer has to know the basics of Linux before moving into the DevOps process as such. For that, we need to know the basics of Linux. Next, after this Linux, there will be a couple of classes for this Linux sessions. And after this, I will be teaching few fundamentals on the scripting also, bash scripting as such, apart from this Linux fundamentals. So after we done with this session, there will be a lab for this both the classes for 1 to 2 days based on the doubts and everything. Once we are done with it, we'll move to the other sessions as such. Okay. So as I said, Linux is our first one. Let me reshare 1 second. So before that, do anyone has experience working on any of the Linux environments? Like at least going through the Linux kernel, missions, terminals, and everything. Just want to know, like if you people don't know also, please let me know. Hello people, am I audible to you?
No, I haven't any idea.
Yeah, that's good to know. Like if you don't have any idea also, I'm fine with it, but just want to check.
Yeah, even I don't have any idea about Linux.
Okay. So basically we should know about the fundamentals of the Linux from start, right? Like then I will go through the Linux. Okay. So today we would be learning about the Linux. Like Linux is basically an Unix based operating system. So what exactly is a Unix? You need to understand how Unix came into the picture before understanding Linux also, right? So we need to understand one more term like Unix. And also if you talk about Linux, it's an open source operating system. Why we call some software as a open source? What exactly do you mean by open source? Anyone has an idea on that?
It's free.
Anyone can contribute into it and it is not chargeable.
Development actually, yes, it can be used as their per need actually. They can name themselves actually use this technology without any licensing issue. It's a free.
Exactly. So both of the people has exactly said what exactly is open source. Like this is why like any person can contribute to this operating system, and also people can use this operating system without any charge. That's why we call Linux is mostly as an open source operating system as such. And basically Linux is basically dependent on Unix. When we say about Unix, Unix is not initially designed as an open source operating system. It is basically designed by AT&T laboratory. As a commercial vendor, you know, right? So if we make a software as a commercial vendor or an operating system as a commercial vendor, so only the copywriters can use this software. So that is why Linux came into the picture. Initially, Unix is one of the copyrighted software which is developed by AT&T Lab as a commercial software where the workstations and also a lot of servers used to run. And only copywriters used to get hold of this operating system and built everything on top of it. but people doesn't want to use everything as an open, like as a commercial one, like they want open sources. That's why Linux became so prevalent. So Linux is basically an extension of Unix, which is developed in 1991, and in 1991 it came into the picture. Okay, there are a lot of open sources of Linux. There are a lot of distributions of Linux also. Have you heard about any of the distributions of Linux? Distributions in the sense the versions, like different lights, like Ubuntu. You might have heard most of the things, right? Just want to know, like, if you have
Yes,
heard about
likewise.
any
I
Red
have
Hat.
heard about Red Hat,
Yes.
Ubuntu, Fedora.
Exactly. Red Hat, Ubuntu, Fedora. Yeah. Any other?
CentOS.
I know this much only.
Yeah, there are few others also, like Debian, GNU, and also Arch Linux. And these are like a few of the distributions. So when we come to the Unix distributions, there are also few distributions that are there, that are something like Sun Solaris, AIX, HP developed their own version, that is something like HP UX, like HP Unix. So these are like few of the versions of Unix as well. Like why people chose to go with Linux is something like, it is like an open source version, which is mostly based on the Linux kernel. So Linux is completely based on the Linux kernel. So what exactly is a kernel? Do anyone know what exactly is a kernel?
It's a core of Linux operating system, and it has a middleware, and it operates commands through it actually.
Sorry, like I just missed you. Like, can you repeat it? Bit-
Kernel is a central part of the Linux operating system, where from the Linux only the commands to pass to kernel itself actually. Whatsoever we are giving command, it goes to kernel and it executes it actually.
what you said is absolutely right. And in terms of definition, if you want to define a kernel, it is like, as you said, it is the main component of Linux operating system, main component of Linux operating component system. Basically, it acts as an interface between a hardware, computer hardware. So any of the system, if any of the operating system needs to run on a hardware, right? So kernel basically acts as an interface between hardware and its corresponding process. If you say start in your terminal, like this is like Windows, right? That's okay, but still. Similarly, in your Linux machine, if you say copy as a command, it's a process. It needs to be understood by your operating system, right? Kernel acts as a mediator in between this operating system and also the process which we give as a command over there. So basically, kernel is an interface between hardware and process. Okay. So here process can be anything. Like if you want to run some what we say, any of the process, like if you want to run some sample application, then we consider it as a process. If you want to run a sample command to copy, remove, run, move, there are multiple commands, right, in Linux. If you want to run any of the command, it will be internally converted into a process. So this process is basically transformed into an understandable language for the hardware by the kernel itself. So that's why we call this as an interface between a hardware and a process. Okay. So there are four major functionalities of kernel. What are the four major functionalities of kernel is something like memory management. Next one is something like process management. And next one is something like device drivers. The first, last and final thing is something like system calls and security. So when we talk about the kernel, we need to understand about the 4 major jobs that kernel does also. Okay. The first one is something like a memory management. Suppose if you run a copy command or if you run a process, like if you start an application, so a certain amount of memory that needs to be allocated for the process to be running, right? Like suppose your machine has around 8 GB of RAM. If you run some sample process over there, like a copy command, at least 1/4 of the, like 1/4 of 1 GB, like 0.25 GB of memory has to be allocated to that corresponding process for it to run properly. So all these things are basically taken care by kernel itself. First thing is something like a memory management. You understood, right? So it will basically keep track of how much memory that needs to be allocated when a process that needs to be run. That is what the memory management does. What exactly process management is all about? So any idea like what exactly the process management is all about? So memory management basically deals with how much RAM needs to be allocated. When we talk about process management, it mostly deals with how much CPU needs to be allocated. For which we are allocating the memory and CPU, whatever the process we are running, for those processes, we are allocating certain amount of RAM and certain amount of CPU so that the process can execute its corresponding things and make them understandable by hardware and perform those things. So for this, we are using both the memory management and process management, which is provided by the kernel itself. Hope it is clear for you people. If you have any questions in the middle, please stop. Okay. So the next one is something like device drivers. Most of us know, like, can you name few of the device drivers? Like in Windows operating system also, we have a lot of device drivers. Like, can you name few of the device drivers which we use?
LAN, display drivers, graphic drivers.
Exactly. Suppose if you give a command to open a GNU, graphical based user interface, from your command line, so it needs to talk to that corresponding device driver and open that graphical user interface, right? At that time, kernel acts as a mediator and talks to the device driver from the process which you have given. Process in the sense, our command which we have given. Suppose if you ask to increase the volume, if you ask something to be played from the command line itself rather than from the UI. So at that time, we need to talk to the device drivers as such. Okay. So for that, it is one of the job which kernel does. What exactly the final one? System calls and security. So in terms of system calls and security, it simply understand, like we already know, like security means what exactly is a security. So in this, kernel acts as a mediator. Like if you execute some command, if you have enough permissions to perform that operation, then only we can perform that operation, right? So there are multiple types of users. Suppose you are an admin, you can perform any type of operation. I can remove everything, I can create everything in any user. Suppose I am not an admin, I am a simple user which has limited permissions. I don't have operations, I don't have anything to delete, permissions to delete. Then what exactly I need to do? If I do something like rm-rf, some file name, kernel will understand and check whether I have enough permissions to delete it or not. If I don't have enough permissions to delete it, based on the security protocols and everything, it says you don't have enough permissions to delete it, and it will stop us to delete that specific service as such. Okay. So in this way, all these 4 jobs are basically integrated with each other And based on that, whenever we have performed some command, it will be translated and understandable in a hardware computing language. And basically in reverse, we will be getting the output as such based on the expected. So now we understand, right, what exactly is a kernel and what are the major jobs of the kernel as such. Okay. So do you have any questions till now?
No, from my end.
Okay, nice to know. Like if you have any questions in the middle also, please feel free to stop in the middle. Okay.
Sure.
And now we understood about the basics of kernel and why we need to have a kernel as such. Okay. And apart from that, we will be talking about the Linux distributions. Okay. So as I said, we have talked about few of the distributions, right? Red Hat Linux, Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, GNU, Arch Linux, and everything. So before that, I'm talking about distributions, right? What exactly do you mean by distribution? Any idea? Just give a rough thing, like what exactly is a distribution?
Like somebody owns
I want
the
this to be interactive.
license,
That's why I'm asking people questions. Okay.
somebody owns the licensed version of freeware where they have given their own names and using as a software for the applications for the companies.
Yeah. On a high level, that is correct. But basically, it basically talks with the form of what are the components which we are using. Like when we talk about the distribution, basically it talks about what type of kernel we are using, what type of supporting software user we are using, what type of what we say libraries which we are using. So when we talk about distribution, it's a combination of Linux kernel, plus libraries, and subsystem software. Based on these three components, we will differentiate distribution. Okay. So what type of Linux kernel it is using, what type of libraries it is using, what type of system software it is using. In this, based on this, all these things, we are basically differentiating what type of distribution and how the distribution is basically named out of. Okay. So let's go deep, like what are the basic distributions we have. Like Linux distributions are basically divided into two types of distribution. One is RPM based distribution. Other one is something like Debian based. Okay. What is RPM? It's something like Resource Package Manager. Okay. So here, based on the Linux kernel which we are using and libraries which we are using and also softwares which we are using, so we have divided basically the Linux distributions into two types. One is something like RPM based and other one is something like a Debian based. When we talk about the RPM based, the most important we need to understand is something like internally, if a Linux operating system uses RPM package manager, then we call it as RPM based distribution. Okay. If it is using DPKG package manager, then we call it as Debian based system. So here we are talking about two things: package manager. Do you understand what exactly is a package manager? Have you heard about package manager anytime? Just give it a try. Just want to talk.
In Windows, actually, we do have a
If no,
zip
no,
file
please.
where we can directly double click and open it and use it actually package.
Yeah. So what you said is somewhat correct, but it's not only the functionality of a package manager. So package manager, we call it as a system or a tool. So package manager is basically a tool which is used to automate installing of a developer tools which you have created. Okay. Suppose developer is there. He created one tool like copy. Copy is one of the tool. Okay. Copy performs copying from one folder to another folder. Suppose one more thing is something like remove as a tool. Okay. Remove performs removing a file. So these are like individual tools. Okay. Suppose you want to install these tools in your operating system. Okay. So what would you do? We need to choose the package manager. So basically using that package manager, using the tool, it basically use it to install upgrade and configure any of the developer tool or a software. Okay. Suppose you want to install what we say, it's CPRM and all. These are like smaller commands, right? Like smaller tools. Suppose if you want to install any of the application server like Tomcat or something like that, it is something like a software.
Services, yes.
So if you want to install that software, then we need to have a package manager. Using that package manager, we can use the corresponding command. So if you use that corresponding command, you can install that Tomcat in your operating system. Suppose one of the command I need to use is something like yum install Tomcat. It will download all the developer tool options and also the configurations into your local and basically install Tomcat in your operating system. So this is what the main uses of package manager basically use it to install, upgrade, and also configure any of the developer tools or a software. Okay. You understood, right? What exactly is a developer tool? Any small piece of software that a developer, we call it as a tool. And that is something like a developer tool, which we can install as part of the operating system. So now here comes what exactly is a package manager. There are two types of package manager. One is something like if you use an RPM based package manager, then basically it is like an RPM based distribution. If you use a DPKG, Debian based package manager, then we call it as a Debian distributions. Okay. So can you name few of the examples or the distributions of the RPM based package manager in the industry, what we are using right now? Do you know any of the few? RHEL, Fedora, XUFC. And also one more thing is there, one more important thing, CentOS. RHEL and CentOS are almost similar. What are the differences? Something like one is something like a freeware, other one is something like a proprietary. We need to have license to use RHEL right now. Whereas if you want to go with CentOS, it is something like a freeware, as we said earlier. Okay, this is something like Fedora. Sorry. So what exactly is a Fedora? So when we said that RHEL is something like a proprietary, if you want to use the same features of RHEL, but using a community edition, then we need to go with Fedora. Community version of RHEL. Similarly, when we talk about DPKJ manager, so what is the major distribution of DPKJ manager? Do you know anything? Ubuntu is a prime example of the DPKG package manager. Emphasis. So these are like few of the examples of the DPKG package manager. Okay. So if you want to install any package in the RPM based package manager, we need to use the command yum install and corresponding thing like whatever we want to install, like Tomcat or something, or HTTP or whatever. Suppose if you want to install in something, some package in your Debian base, we need to use
apt get.
So with this, we came to understood few of the things from your Linux and why Linux came into the picture. When Linux came into the picture in 1991, why Linux is more prevalent, because it's basically an open source compared to Unix, whereas Unix is like a proprietary initially when it is developed. Only have enough licenses used to have. Like, do you have any questions?
Sorry, it's not.
Can someone be on mute? Like,
Lot of background noises there, please. I think from Hari.
okay. So with this, we came to the conclusion and we came to the understanding like how Linux come into the picture, why we need to use Linux as an operating system, and what are the major distributions of Linux operating system. Based on the distributions, we are differentiating the operating system. One is something like a Debian based, one is something like an RPM based. So industry mostly uses RPM based Linux system, and also few people, like around 20 to 30% of still people are using Debian based operating systems also. But if you go to any of the AWS operating system like or Amazon Linux or something like that, so the Amazon Linux and everything are basically developed on top of RHEL and CentOS only. Okay, which basically uses M as a package manager. Okay, if there is a specific requirement that you need to use Debian based operating system, then you need to use apt-get as your package manager, and using that you need to install most of the things. Okay, apart from that, today we learned about few of other things also. What exactly is a kernel, like which acts as an interface between your hardware and a process. And also the next thing we learned is something like what are the 4 major jobs of your kernel, like memory management, process management, device drivers, and also the system calls. Okay, and we also learned about how initially Unix has been developed in the AT&T laboratory as a commercial version, and what are the major distributions of the Unix initially. Okay, so do we have any questions till now? If we are fine with that, like I will go on to the next thing which we need to understand. Okay. Hello, people. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Please speak out. Like sometimes, like I feel like it should not be a one-way communication. Even if you don't understand anything, please speak out. Okay. Say that you haven't understood anything, like we can talk together separately, not in the same class. Okay. So people needs to understand these basics. Like without understand these basics, like we cannot simply go and learn DevOps and why exactly DevOps come into the picture. First of all, the basics fundamentals of any of the DevOps session is something like having the basic fundamentals of Linux, like why Linux came into the picture, what is a kernel, and what are the distributions of Linux. So from next thing, we need to learn about few of the Linux commands as such. So in order to learn Linux command, you need to have some command line interface that you need to run on top of it, right? So right now, most of us are using Windows as an operating system. So if you use Windows as an operating system, like we cannot run those Linux commands over there. So for that, what we need to do? So for that, I will be sharing you some set of steps where we need to use virtual machine in your operating system. So we need to download Oracle VirtualBox in your local machine. And also we need to download a CentOS distribution. On top of it, we need to start that mission. And after starting those missions, we will be learning all these Linux commands over there. Okay. So right now, I already have this Oracle virtual machine installed in my operating system, Windows operating system. And also I have CentOS also added. Like, first of all, I want you people to download both of these things. Once you have downloaded, in next session, we will be talking about how to install them. So once it is installed, basically we will start this operating system in your Windows machine itself. And basically we can practice on top of it. This is one way of doing it. Once we reach to the, what we say, AWS classes and everything, at that time we can provision and sample free tier EC2 instance. From that EC2 instance, we can practice the remaining commands and also remaining installations and everything. Okay. Without this, the practice won't be happen.
So we can use Vagrant, right?
Sorry.
We can even use Vagrant, right?
Yeah, you can even use Vagrant. If you have anything in your local, you can use it directly. Okay. But if you don't have, like if you are just using any of the Windows machine, better install some VirtualBox.
Okay. I tried to use the virtual machine, but it was very slow. It's making my laptop very slow, go slow actually. So I was using the interface as a Vagrant and using on the VirtualBox machine on top of that.
What is that software which you told? Means the other guy who was speaking, I don't know his name. Can you, I think Amir, right? Can you
Yeah.
tell me the name of that?
Vagrant, V-A-G-R-A-N-T. V-A-G-R-A-N-T.
V-A-G.
R-A-N-T.
Thanks.
Hello, people. Am I audible right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, nice to know. So basically, like I just want to talk about few things. Like as I said, like I'm asking you people like whether we want to go with virtual machine or can we have AWS? Can we have an AWS account and on top of it, let's create one EC2 instance and use it everywhere. Like there are two options we have right now. Like if you go to AWS right now, like it's like a switching, like without knowing the basics, we are directly starting with AWS and we have to create one EC2 instance over there. That is also fine. But what do you think is the best way you want to learn on this? But AWS virtual machine would be so fast.
Actually, we
If we
want
can
from
use the
basic.
free trial, then surely we can go with that.
Yeah, initially we will go with the virtual box. So I will
Yeah.
be sharing the couple of links with you people. Please try to download those things. That's it. I just want you people to just download those things. And tomorrow we will go with the initial steps, like how exactly we need to have the virtual machine installed. On top of it, once it is installed, we will start with our initial process. Okay. Is that fine with everyone?
Yeah.
Once we go with the AWS, once we start with the AWS after a couple of weeks or 2 to 3 weeks, we will just have a virtual machine created over there, EC2 instance, and use that. Okay. Any other questions till now? That today we mostly covered about the basic fundamentals only. So hope everything is clear for you.
Yeah.
Yes, today's session is clear.
Okay. So from tomorrow, like we will be learning about the basic Linux commands. As I said, like file commands, process management commands, file permission commands, and also few pattern searching and also system info commands are there, right? We'll be going through most of the commands in detail. And once it is done, we will be having a corresponding class also. Before that, we need to have a virtual box installed in our local machines. Like hope everyone have a laptop with you people. Like without laptop, we cannot practice any of these sessions. This is a virtual thing, right? Okay. If you have any issues with your laptops and everything, please reach out to me, like while installing the virtual box and everything, like I can sort it out. Okay. Thanks, people. Like I would be sharing you the links of all the virtual box where we need to install and how to get those links. And using that, please download it by tomorrow. Okay. Madhu will be sharing you all these details with you. Okay. He will be sending you the notification.
Sure, sir.
Okay. Thanks everyone for today's session. Like hope we can meet tomorrow. And one more last thing, like before leaving, sorry, like, so am I going in a right pace or shall I go a bit faster? Like, as this is our first session, like I went a bit slow. Like if you want it to be a bit faster also, I can go a bit faster.
No, this flow is actually comfortable for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Other people also, like if you still feel it needs to be a bit faster, talk to Madhu also. Like it's up to you people. You need to understand all these things, right? Like that's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Thanks for joining. Have a nice day. Hope we will meet tomorrow. Thank you.
I should the same.